Hello and welcome to ProjectWise Administrator Fundamentals Accreditation course, Restricted Administrator. In this lesson, we will learn about Restricted Administrator, what a Restricted Administrator can and cannot do, and the difference between a Restricted Administrator and a full Administrator. In the previous lesson, we did discuss about the user setting, use access control. We will discuss this again, the impact of disabling this option for a restricted administrator, or really the impact of disabling use access control for all ProjectWise users. There are two groups, administrator and restricted administrator, already existed when we first connect to a ProjectWise data source. Only members from these two groups are able to connect to the data source via the ProjectWise Administrator module. All other members can connect to the data source via ProjectWise Explorer. Members from the administrator group can access all the nodes under the data source name on the left-hand side. Restricted administrator, as the name implies, have been restricted and can only see a selective set of nodes on the left designated by ProjectWise Administrator. In this exercise, we will assign the project manager to be a restricted administrator. We will also allow the project manager to use the ProjectWise Administrator module to connect to the data source and only be able to view and access the users, groups, and user list node. First, let's make project manager to be a member of the restricted administrator group. By going to the member of tab, click on add and select restricted administrator and hit OK. Hit OK again. We completed the first step by setting project manager to be the restricted administrator. In the next step, we can set it up so that restricted administrator can only access a selective set of nodes, for example, the users node. So let's right mouse click on users, properties. On the granular security tab, click on the add button. We can select project manager or we can select restricted administrator and hit OK. Highlight restricted administrator. We can leave the changed settings on. This will allow members of restricted administrator group to be able to create, modify user settings, and delete most users, except making changes or deleting administrator account. Later on, we will discuss more about this. Since the change permissions is not enabled, this means that restricted administrator will not be able to open the same dialog window and add other users to the granular security tab. So let's go ahead and hit OK. Now that we have seen how project manager can be assigned as a restricted administrator and configured in such a way that project manager can only access the 3 nodes under the data source name, let's go ahead and validate that. Let's log into the data source using the project manager credentials. Here we can see project manager can view and access the users node, the groups and user list node. Project manager can create a new user and modify most of the user settings. However, since project manager is only a restricted administrator, he or she cannot add himself or herself to be a member of the administrator group. Let's go ahead and cancel that, since project manager cannot add himself or herself to the administrator group. Also, project manager, being the restricted administrator, cannot delete other administrator account. There are some other settings that prohibit restrict administrator from changing. For example, disabling the use access control. There is a huge impact when use access control is disabled for a particular user account. In this case, for demonstration purpose, full administrator have disabled use access control for project manager. And as we can see, with the impact of this change is that project manager is no longer a restricted administrator. Now, project manager can access all the nodes under the data source name, not just the 3 nodes we configured earlier in the lesson. This is why it's very important that all ProjectWise users should have the use access control enabled. During this lesson, we have learned what is a restricted administrator and what a restricted administrator can and cannot do. We also learned the difference between a restricted administrator and a full administrator. We also learned the impact of disabling the use access control for a restricted administrator.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and share it with others. If you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to this and Bentley's other channels. Thank you, and see you next time.